What's going on, Daredevils? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is going to be a breakdown of the director's cut from Daredevil from 2003, Ben Affleck's first dip into the superhero genre. And it's a dip that almost caused him to swear off superhero movies forever. Because I don't know if you guys knew this, but before Ben Affleck was Batman, he played another type of Night Stalker, if you will. So let's just make like Matt and jump off a roof into this thing, my nerd babies. And much like most Marvel movies at the time, like X-Men, this movie begins with a 3D animated credit sequence. But this time around, the viewers are transported through the streets of Hell's Kitchen as seen through the perspective of a Daredevil that uses his amplified senses to get around, in an effect that the VFX team of this movie would refer to as Daredevil's Shadow World. And it's called that because we primarily see what Daredevil is sensing through shadows.
Essentially what I'm working on is the visual interpretation of the way our blind superhero Daredevil sees. He uses echolocation like a bat or a dolphin, and he essentially sees aurally. So we need to convey what he hears or sees to the audience visually, and the way we're doing that is a series of shots called Shadow World.
And while Charlie Cox's Netflix Daredevil typically sees everything as a world on fire to thematically evoke the image of hell, this Daredevil very much sees in a way that resembles echolocation, much like Batman's sonar lenses do in The Dark Knight. But this isn't limited to just sound, as even smells like smoke or perfume have been amplified courtesy of Daredevil's radioactive accident. And after the film's super cool Braille opening credit sequence highlighting the film's biggest stars, we get the Daredevil logo followed by Daredevil's iconic double Ds. Double Ds that actually were introduced in Daredevil's 5th issue in 1964 when Wallace Wood took over as illustrator of the comics. A design choice I always felt kind of odd considering that Daredevil is a singular word as opposed to two separate words. But hey, there was a time in Marvel Comics when Daredevil's name was hyphenated just like Spider-Man, so I guess it kinda did work better then. But I am kinda glad that the MCU's Daredevil kinda ditched the whole double Ds on the chest thing because it kinda really doesn't make sense to me. But hey, speaking of double Ds, apparently the production originally aimed for this movie to be released in theaters with an R rating, with director Mark Steven Johnson expressing frustration at 20th Century Fox for making him go PG-13. But luckily for us, this is going to be a breakdown of the R-rated director's cut of the movie, a cut that is far superior in my opinion, as it is a lot more violent, edited a lot more fluidly, and adds a whole court subplot featuring famous hip-hop rapper Coolio as Dante Jackson, that is framed for the murder of a woman named Lisa Tazio by Kingpin's butt muncher of a sidekick, Wesley. And that whole Coolio situation was kinda messed up because while they did use Coolio in the promotional material for the movie, they completely cut him out of the theatrical cut for some weird reason. But luckily the director's cut is able to show us just how hilarious Coolio's cameos were. And it's straight up one of my favorite parts of the movie, to be honest. But anyways, Daredevil's story starts as he's bleeding over a Catholic church after facing off against Electra and Bullseye. This shot is actually a reference to the cover of 1999's Marvel Knights Daredevil number 3. His blood trickles down onto a stained glass image of Mother Mary before Daredevil descends from the ceiling and painfully lands on the floor in front of the church, entering the movie in a very Jesus-esque fashion by sort of coming from above. This then causes Father Everett to enter the sanctuary to find and unmask a bleeding Matt Murdock, who start to have a flashback of the events that led up to that moment in the film, starting from when he was a child growing up in Hell's Kitchen with his dad, Jack Murdock, a dad that Matt is led to believe is a construction worker by day and an amateur boxer going by Jack the Devil Murdock by night, which is a name that differs from the comics as Jack's boxing name in the comics is actually Battling Jack Murdock. And even though Matt's dad keeps telling young Matty to stay out of fights with other kids and to get good grades, Jack Murdock was actually being a big ol' hypocrite due to him secretly working for the mob the entire time, something that Matt would not find out until he tried to go surprise his father with his impressive report card at his former construction job. But the head construction guy was like, "Nah kid, your dad hasn't worked here for months, he's kind of a bum." And after tossing his report card of straight A's and perfect attendance to the ground, Matt would coincidentally stumble upon his father Jack roughing up some dude from the mob, causing Matt to dramatically run away from his father in shame. But since Matt was too busy being a drama queen, that he would absentmindedly run into a site transporting hazardous waste and cause a forklift to slice open a red metal canister of radioactive fluids that would immediately splash on Matt's eyes, permanently blinding him, but also seemingly sending a jolt of red radioactive energy into Matt's eyes that would eventually serve to enhance Matt Murdock's senses dramatically. And after making up with his father, the both of them would resolve to be a duo that always encouraged each other to never give up on their walk on the straight and narrow, with his father sharpening his skills in the ring, while Matt secretly trained to hone his heightened senses to tap into his inner parkour street ninja within. This differs dramatically from the comics, as we know that Matt Murdock actually gets trained by a mysterious man named Stick, who basically teaches him how to be an actual ninja-ass fighter. And during this mini training montage, we see a young Matt Murdock slide down a super long beam to a lower rooftop. We would actually see an adult Daredevil express his inner child through a similar slide during Daredevil's fight at Josie's bar later on in the movie. And through his mastery of his new abilities, a young Matt Murdock starts his hero career early by saving an old man reading the New York Post from absent-mindedly walking into the street, with that old man being played by the one and only cameo king Stan Lee. And speaking of Stan Lee, despite deciding to cameo for this movie, Stan Lee actually wasn't the biggest fan of the film, saying that the movie was far too tragic for his tastes, which must have been a huge bummer for director Mark Steven Johnson to hear, because directing this project was actually a dream come true for him, as he basically fought tooth and nail to try to get some executive to give him a shot at directing a movie for his favorite Marvel character. But anyway, shortly after this, a young Matt decides to walk the same alleyway that his neighborhood bullies love to beat him up at. But this time it would be a young blind Matthew kicking the ass, as his new powers have turned little Matty into a boy without fear. And later that night, Jack the Devil Murdock is set to face off against a fighter named John Romita, which is a fun nod to John Romita Sr. and his son John Romita Jr., who both did art for Daredevil at one point during their careers. And there are actually a number of really great comic book creators referenced throughout this movie. I mean, Father Everett, who appears at the very start of this movie, is a reference to Daredevil artist Bill Everett, responsible for doing the art for the first Daredevil issue. And then later, Daredevil would go to hunt down an unremorseful sexual predator named Jose Quesada, whose character was named after Joe Quesada, who also served as a Daredevil artist in the 90s before becoming Marvel's editor-in-chief. Nerd legend Kevin Smith is in this movie as well, playing a lab tech named Kirby, a nod to comic book legend Jack Kirby, who did a good amount of comic book cover art for Daredevil in the 60s. And other Daredevil artists referenced in this movie are Gene Colan, David Mack, and Frank Miller, who are all referenced in this movie as boxers, with Fallon's bodyguard even being named Kane after Daredevil cover artist Gil Kane. But anyway, speaking of Fallon, Fallon tells Jack Murdock to throw the big match against Romita, but Jack's like, "I don't work for you no more, you old bitch," to which Fallon was then like, yeah you do. Miller, Mack, and Bendis all threw their fights against you because you ain't no spring chicken either, Jackie boy. With Miller, Mack, and Bendis all being prominent Marvel creators. And conflicted about what to do, Jack then heads towards the ring, with his red devil-horned hoodie casting a foreboding shadow over his son. And after Jack defies Fallon by winning the match anyway, he throws that very same hood on his son, right before Fallon would have a younger Wilson Fisk beat him to death for that defiance. And while Matt grieves over his father's dead body and clutches the rose that Fisk left behind, Matt would resolve to seek justice and to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Then we flash forward through time as the camera pans over a CG animated mock-up of Hell's Kitchen. VFX would be key to capturing that true New York feel, as this movie was primarily filmed in Los Angeles. And after the camera zooms into the image of Mother Mary on the church stained glass window, that face fades into the face of Matt Murdock from his sensory deprivation tank of a bed. That transition to me was meant to clearly make Daredevil appear like a Jesus-type savior for Hell's Kitchen, with Mary waiting for him to rise from his tomb like she waited for Jesus to do the same in the Bible. And as Matt gets ready for another day of lawyerin' by cranking Hang On by Seether, he folds his money in particular ways in order for him to be able to identify what type of bill he's using. And while every blind person has their own way of organizing their money, the usual method of blind bill folding has $5 bills being folded lengthwise, $10 bills being folded widthwise, $20 bills being folded length first, then by width, and then single dollars not being folded at all. Matt then goes to court in an attempt to bring Jose Quesada to justice for the sexual aggression he perpetrated against a bartender named Angela Sutton who worked at Josie's Bar. Josie's Bar is a popular bar in Hell's Kitchen in the Marvel Comics that made its first appearance in 1979's Daredevil number 160. However, Matt loses that trial and Quesada goes free, forcing Matt Murdock to seek justice himself as the Daredevil. And after Matt suits up, he jumps off a building, very much evoking the cover of 1993's Daredevil 319, before heading to Josie's Bar, with Josie herself heading the bar that night. As Jose Quesada celebrates being exonerated for his crime, one of his boys notices Daredevil stalking him in the darkness, with that actor actually being the cousin of the hierarchy-changing Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And Daredevil then does his thing and kicks the asses of all of Quesada's men at the bar before standing on a burning pool table calling for Quesada himself. We get similar imagery of Daredevil doing a similar thing in the pages of Daredevil 364. Then Daredevil begins chasing Quesada himself, echoing Daredevil's attack on a villain called the Fixer in the first ever Daredevil comic, with Daredevil even chasing Quesada down to a subway, just like he did with the Fixer in that issue as well. However, while the Fixer would die from a surprise heart attack in the comics, Daredevil would end up leaving Quesada to get run over by a train in this movie, very much violating Daredevil's no-killing rule that he has in the comic books, something that Ben Affleck would also do with Batman in Batman v Superman. Comic book Daredevil would actually save his nemesis Bullseye from getting run over by a subway train in Daredevil 169, so I definitely understand why Stan Lee wasn't the biggest fan of this more savage adaptation. And in response to the murder, both the police and the news show up, with Joe Pantoliano's Ben Urich looking for police confirmation of the Daredevil's existence, but police captain Nick Manolis refuses to give it to him. Reporter Ben Urich would make his first appearance in 1978's Daredevil 153, while Manolis would make his first appearance in 1980's Daredevil 167. Urich and Manolis would butt heads during the Born Again storyline from 1986, which could have served as inspiration for their relationship in this movie. And when Matt gets home from his casual murder, he gets a phone call from a woman named Heather who is breaking up with him for being so distant, with Heather likely being a reference to the Daredevil character Heather Glenn, who was comic book Matt Murdock's girlfriend during Frank Miller's Daredevil run. And as Matt gets undressed, we can see that he has multiple Daredevil masks on standby in case he were to ever lose one. But speaking of Daredevil's costume, getting the look right was actually one of the most difficult parts of the movie's production, with the production team taking a full 7 to 8 months to finalize a design. And apparently, there was a whole lot of arguing about which way to go.
I would say realistically we spent about 7 or 8 months going through it. Ultimately, for the good of the movie, and I know Mark is happy about it, ultimately everybody realized that the traditional look of Daredevil had to be maintained.
However, after playing the role of Daredevil in this movie, Ben Affleck pretty much swore off ever playing another superhero in the future, citing the Daredevil costume as a, quote, source of humiliation for him and something that he wouldn't want to do again soon. But we all know that Ben Affleck would change his mind for Zack Snyder when he was approached to play Batman in Batman v Superman and Justice League. But anyways, Matt then heads to sleep for the night in his sensory deprivation tank of a bed, just like comic book Matt Murdock would do in 1982's Daredevil 188, as well as 1981's What If number 28. And right before he goes to bed, Matt senses the death of Lisa Tazio all the way from where he is, not knowing that he's about to get Coolio acquitted for her murder not too long from then. The next day, we then catch Matt having some coffee with his business partner Foggy Nelson, played by actor Jon Favreau. Jon Favreau's inclusion in this movie would prove to be absolutely instrumental to the future formation of the MCU, as Favreau would start having talks with Marvel about producing an Iron Man film for them in the future on the set of this movie. And also, fun fact, Seth Rogen actually also auditioned for the part of Foggy Nelson in this movie, which is super hilarious as Rogen would eventually dip his toes into the world of superheroes when he became the Green Hornet in the year 2011. And that was before he would end up producing incredibly successful superhero projects like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem and Amazon's 2-hit TV series Invincible and The Boys. Foggy would then show Matt an artist's rendering of the mythical Daredevil, with that drawing being done by a person named Mark Bayard, who was actually a storyboard artist for both this movie and the first Venom movie. So we all know that Mark Bayard only works on bangers. Oh man, I'm sorry, Mark. Then Foggy yells at Matt for accepting a payment in fish from a Mr. Lee, which could be another reference to Stan Lee. Then Foggy asks Matt as to where he got those cuts and bruises on his face, with Matt referencing the 1999 movie Fight Club by saying that he's in a fight club. Then, not long after this, in comes Electra Nachios, played by Jennifer Garner, a character who would get a universally hated spin-off movie of her own with 2005's Electra. But I can definitely see why they decided to give Garner her own go at her own movie, because Homegirl really put in the work to get ready for her role as Electra.
I spent all of last year learning to fight, learning just the smallest bit of how to perform martial arts for the camera. Immediately I knew that I wanted to train with whoever they would have training Ben for this movie, and in this case it was Master Chen Yan and his wire team from Hong Kong. And also, so that was actually my absolute initial first response was, oh, how fun to do these fights and work with somebody great and work really hard and be focused on just fighting.
And we see a lot of Garner's hard work as Electra reflected in the following sequence of her and Matt Murdock having their fight at a nearby park. Both Jennifer and Ben did all the stunt work for this scene, with nothing but the help of harnesses to make their jumps slightly more epic. However, unfortunately for actor Ben Affleck, all the wire work that he had to do for this movie definitely did a number on both of his Afflecks, if you know what I mean, which seems incredibly painful.
You know, wearing the wire rig sort of feels like you'll never be able to have children in the future. It holds you up. You're holding your whole body weight essentially by your sort of waist and between your legs and your inner thighs, and it cinches you in there. And it's great because, you know, adoption is a route that I am okay with, you know, and I've thought about. So that's where this picture leaves me.
Then anyways, after Matt Murdock fights Electra Nachios for her name like a weirdo, she's quickly whisked away by a limo. Because, you know, Homegirl is big time rich as the daughter of Nicholas Nachios, who is apparently an ally of Michael Clark Duncan's Kingpin, who wants no more of Wilson's sketchiness in his life after the Kingpin starts to get talked about more in the local media. But Nicholas Nachios clearly did not see the Kingpin just murder two of his own bodyguards with his own hands. So needless to say, Nicholas gets marked for deletion by Kingpin for defying him. A Kingpin who would quickly hire Bullseye to take care of his Nachios problem. The psychotic Bullseye is played by the incredibly talented Colin Farrell using his authentic Irish accent, with this Daredevil movie being the first time that Farrell would use his Irish accent in a Hollywood film. Bullseye actually didn't have a thick Irish accent in the original comics, so this accent was a unique decision made by the director, just like their decision to cast Michael Clark Duncan as the Kingpin, despite Kingpin being white in the comics. To Mark Steven Johnson, it was always about getting the right actor for the role versus matching up to the comics exactly. And on Bullseye's forehead is a brand that vastly differs from the design of comic book Bullseye, whose forehead Bullseye symbol was merely part of his costume. But to show just how crazy this Bullseye is, they imply that he purposely branded his own self with a mark, because that dude was so prideful in his ability to never miss. Then we get a sequence of Bullseye arriving to an American airport and going through security, a scene that was completely absent from the theatrical version. And not long after this, Electra and Matt go on an impromptu date at night right before it rains, allowing for Matt to see what Electra actually looks like for the first time. However, the very next day, we would immediately be introduced to yet another one of Matt Murdock's major comic book love interests when Ellen Pompeo's Karen Page is introduced as a secretary for Nelson and Murdock, with Page actually being cut out for the movie's theatrical version altogether. Page then gives Matt his invitation to the Nachios party, very much implying that she would like him to take her as his date.
So pick me. Choose me. Love me.
But unfortunately for her, Foggy Nelson is all over it.
Wah, wah, wah.
And then, while Matt and Electra flirt later on that night at the party, Bullseye is on his way to the function after murdering a man with a pen and then stealing that man's motorcycle, with that innocent victim being famous comic book writer Frank Miller. Bullseye is no stranger to killing a person with a pen in the comics, as he would do so in his first appearance in Daredevil 131. And then, when Nicholas Nachios gets spooked by a foreboding rose from Fisk, he tries to get himself to safety, but his car is immediately attacked by Bullseye. And though Daredevil would cause Bullseye to miss for the very first time in his life, he would be unable to stop Bullseye from killing Nicholas Nachios with one of his own clubs, something Bullseye did to Karen Page in 1999's Daredevil number 5. And because Daredevil's weapon was the one to kill her father, Electra then blames Daredevil for her father's death and starts honing her martial arts skills in order to prepare to kill him as revenge. In the director's cut, there is basically no mention of Electra's past martial arts skills. So seeing her prepared to fight the Daredevil is kind of like sort of unrealistic in this cut in this movie, because she hasn't really been established as a real fighter, because we don't really know where she actually got this training from. Meanwhile, Bullseye decides to make himself comfortable at Kingpin's desk before telling Kingpin that he's desperate to kill Daredevil for making him miss. And this imagery of Bullseye putting his feet up on a desk comes from 1981's Daredevil 172. And a little later, we see Matt Murdock supporting Electra by attending her father's funeral, something that comic book Matt Murdock also did in Daredevil 168 from 1980. And after the funeral, Ben Urich lets Matt Murdock know that a police officer named Robert McKenzie is actually working for the Kingpin, something that confuses Matt because he previously used his super hearing on Mackenzie's heartbeat to prove that he was telling the truth, only to later find out that Mackenzie's heart was being regulated by a pacemaker, something that also happens to comic book Daredevil and a character named Hogman in Daredevil 184. And the character Robert McKenzie is also a nod to Daredevil writer Roger McKenzie. This then prompts Electra to go after Daredevil, leading the two to having a battle on the rooftops. And a lot of this battle is inspired by Daredevil's fight with Echo, found in the pages of Daredevil 9-15 from 1999. In particular, Electra's costume, which Electra seems to adapt from Echo in this movie. Like she straight up stole Echo's whole wardrobe here. Then, after Electra pierces Daredevil in the shoulder, she realizes she's made a big mistake after discovering that Daredevil was Matt Murdock the entire time. But soon after this comes Bullseye, looking to finish off the Nachios bloodline for Kingpin. And to that end, Bullseye would throw an Ace of Spades playing card at Electra's neck after saying the words, "You're good, baby, I'll give you that, but me, I'm magic," which is exactly what Bullseye said in Daredevil 181. But unfortunately for Electra, this would then precede her getting stabbed by Bullseye with her own sai, just like it did in that comic as well. This then leads Daredevil and Bullseye to have a final showdown at his local church, a fight that ends with Daredevil cleverly using a sniper's gunshot to pierce both of Bullseye's hands, leading to Bullseye to plead for mercy with holes in his hands, evoking the image of Jesus on the cross in the Bible. This then leaves Daredevil throwing that bum out of a window and leaving him seemingly for dead. But we would learn later on in the movie that Bullseye was merely severely wounded and paralyzed. Daredevil 181 also features Daredevil dropping Bullseye from a great height and severely paralyzing him as well. And this of course leads to Daredevil's final showdown confronting Fisk at Fisk's tower in a fight sequence that seems to reference their fight in Daredevil 228. But unlike that comic, Daredevil would actually end up winning with the help of Kingpin's sprinkler system. Sprinklers that were actually spitting out heated water in order for both the actors to be able to fight as comfortably as possible. Then Daredevil decisively ends the battle by breaking both of Kingpin's kneecaps, something that comic book Daredevil would do with his father's killer in the pages of Daredevil the Man Without Fear #2. Then the movie ends with Matt finding a sign of Electra's survival after finding her necklace on a roof, paving the road for Electra's standalone movie 2 years later. And thanks to some really clever thinking by Ellen Pompeo's Karen Page, Foggy is able to pin Coolio's charges on the real man responsible, Kingpin's right-hand man, Wesley. And also, despite reporter Ben Urich discovering Daredevil's identity through the help of Kevin Smith's character Kirby, he decides to keep his identity secret so Daredevil can keep kicking ass for the good of Hell's Kitchen. With Ben Urich even saying, "Go get him, Matt," in a similar way to how Mary Jane would tell Peter Parker to "go get him, Tiger" at the end of Spider-Man 2. Then the movie ends with Daredevil jumping off of a building and throwing his baton at the camera, evoking the classic cover of 1998 Daredevil #1, drawn by Joe Quesada. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of the director's cut of Daredevil from 2003. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. You guys can follow me at Mastertainment on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube. And when you do, hit that notification bell so you can get notifications for every time we upload a video. But yes, I love you guys. Times a million bazillion. And I'll catch you guys later. Bye.